Let's talk sleepers, breakouts, and busts for the second half of the season. Up next on Fantasy Baseball Today in 5. Welcome into FBT in 5 on Friday, July 5th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White. Hope everyone enjoyed their 4th of July. Let's get into sleepers for the second half. And Scott, you are up.
Me first. Okay. Sleeper for the second half. Clayton Kershaw. I think people are totally sleeping on Clayton Kershaw, if you could believe it. He's coming back from a shoulder injury. He's had shoulder injuries more often than not throughout the last several years. His velocity has fallen to around 90 miles per hour on average. There were times it was 88 miles per hour on average last year. And it doesn't seem to matter. He just keeps doing his Clayton Kershaw thing. Last year, 2.46 ERA, 106 WHIP, more than a K per, won 13 games in 24 starts, because that's what happens when you pitch for the Dodgers and have a 2.46 ERA. So I expect Clayton Kershaw to come back early in the second half, as he's trending to do, and just deliver similar numbers to what he's always done, and be a big winner for the Dodgers, potentially a league winner in fantasy. And I feel like you could say the same for other long-term injured starters who are poised to come back early in the second half. Jeffrey Springs, a little later, Jacob deGrom, Robbie Ray, maybe to a lesser extent. I feel like everybody's sleeping on them still, because we knew they were going to be out for a long time. We just kind of put them out of our mind. Well, that time is nearing for all of them, and I think it's time to get them stashed if it's still possible.
Clayton Kershaw, 67% rostered on CBS, so could be out there in some shallower leagues. A couple other names that could be out there, my sleepers, TJ Friedl, who is 61% rostered on CBS, currently on the IL with a hamstring injury, but should be ready to go after the All-Star break. He's only played 26 games this season, but 4 homers, 6 steals, a lower batting average, but the XBA right around 250. I think if he can do that with a 15 to 20 home run, 30 steal pace in the second half, that we could have a very useful outfielder. And Max Meyer, who we saw dominate earlier this season, a 2.12 ERA, a .82 WHIP, only 3 starts in the majors, a very small sample size, but I do think that he can impact ratios, strikeouts, wins could be hard to come by, but Max Meyer, I think, could make a pretty big impact in the second half. So him, Friedl, Clayton Kershaw, some sleepers there. What about the breakouts in the second half?
Going to go with Christopher Morel, who I have been waiting to catch fire all season long and go on one of those hot streaks like we saw the previous 2 years that just vaults him into must-start territory in fantasy. It hasn't happened yet, but I still think it's going to, because, like I said, he had it the last 2 years with the strikeout rate over 30%. This year, he's gotten that strikeout rate down to 22%. It's basically held there. It's pretty good strikeout rate. It has impacted Christopher Morel's exit velocities a little, but they're still good. And the expected stats on StatCast are still very promising. So on the season, Christopher Morel has only hit 195 with the 370 slugging percentage as of this recording. Bad numbers, obviously. I think he's been pretty productive in fantasy considering how bad those numbers are, but they're bad numbers. 195, 370. His expected batting average is 251. His expected slug is 472. Much, much better. I think it's inevitable he'll get hot enough to bring his actual numbers up close to those numbers. And I'll go ahead and a bonus name here. It's kind of the same situation. Trevor Larnach, guy who's always hit the ball hard, greatly improved his strikeout rate this year. It's actually down to 18% for the Twins. And the expected stats even better than for Christopher Morel. They're among the best in the league, in fact. 90th percentile, 291 XBA, 511 X slug. I can understand why the Twins are wanting to give Larnach every chance, because he looks like a pretty special hitter. And I'm hopeful in the second half he turns into that.
For me, I'm banking on prospect pedigree. We've talked a lot about Wyatt Langford and Jackson Chourio. I think both take a big step forward in the second half. And one more name, Gavin Williams, who was regarded as one of the top pitching prospects entering last season, and he pitched well in 2023. He's missed basically this entire season with an elbow injury, but now he's recently returned. He pitches for a good team. There's strikeout upside there. So Gavin Williams is someone I could see taking a big step in the second half as well. Scott, who is someone you could see taking a step back in the second half?
Well, I think the most obvious is Tyler Anderson. Every time we've talked about him on the podcast, I've talked about how much of an overachiever he is and how much I don't believe in him. And his last couple starts, we may have seen that begin to manifest, but even more to come here for Travis Anderson, considering he has the second biggest gap between actual ERA and both xFIP, and both xERA and FIP. So no matter how you measure what his pitcher's ERA should be, Anderson is one of the biggest overachievers. I think you're going to end up dropping him everywhere in the second half because he's going to be so bad. And also I'll mention Jurickson Profar here. He's kept it going longer than I thought he would, but I still don't see a lot of evidence that he's a fundamentally transformed player. He's just been hitting the ball harder on average, and he's maintained good numbers because of that. But we have an 11-year track record of Jurickson Profar being a mediocre player. I think there's a chance he regresses to that even still.
The name I'll bring up, and I don't think he's going to bottom out, but I could see him taking a step back, and that is Shota Imanaga. And this is relative to expectations. I could see him pitching to a mid to high threes ERA in the second half, and some people might be left disappointed just based on what Imanaga did for most of the first half. The weather is heating up. He allows a lot of fly balls, lots of barrels. I think home runs could be a problem. So I think he's still going to be serviceable, but maybe not as good as we saw in the first half. Again, that is Shota Imanaga. For more extensive fantasy baseball coverage, listen to the Fantasy Baseball Today podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the Odyssey app, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Thanks for listening to Fantasy Baseball Today in 5, and we will be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.